Neil was wearing gas station coveralls and helping Bill. And Bill had found a great big piece of thick, rotten wood and was desperately yanking at little nails embedded in it with a hammer hook. We stared at the nails, and there were millions of them. They were like worms. When I get all these nails out, I'm gonna build me a shelf that'll last 1,000 years, said Bill, with every bone shuddering with senile excitement. Why, Jack, do you realize the shelves they build these days crack under the weight of a clock after 6 months or generally collapse? Same with houses, same with clothes. These bastards have invented plastics by which they could make houses that last forever. And tires? Americans are killing themselves by the millions every year with defective rubber tires that get hot on the road and blow up. They could make tires that never blow up. Same with tooth powder. There's a certain gum they've invented, and they won't show it to anybody. If you chew it as a kid, you'll never get a cavity for the rest of your born days. Same with clothes. They can make clothes that last forever. They prefer making cheap goods, so everybody will have to go on working and punching time clocks and organizing themselves and selling unions and floundering around while the big grab goes on in Washington and in Moscow. He raised his big piece of rotten wood. Don't you think this will make a splendid shelf? It was early in the morning. His energy was at its peak. The poor fellow took so much junk in his system, he could only weather the vast proportion of his day in that chair with the lamp burning at noon, but in the morning he was magnificent. We began throwing knives at the target. He said he'd seen an Arab in Tunis who could stick a man's eye from 40 feet, and this got him going on his aunt, who went to the Casbah in the 30s. She was with a party of tourists led by a guide. She had a diamond ring on her little finger. She leaned on a wall to rest a minute, and an Arab rushed up and sliced off her little finger. All before she could let out a cry. She suddenly realized she had no little finger. Hi, hi, hi. When he laughed, he compressed his lips together and made it come out from his belly. From way far away and doubled up to lean on his knees, he laughed a long time. Hey, Joan, he yelled gleefully. I was just telling Neil about my aunt in the Casbah. I heard you, she said across the lovely, warm Gulf morning from the kitchen door. Great, beautiful clouds floated overhead, valley clouds that made you feel the vastness of old, tumble-down, holy America from mouth to mouth and tip to tip. Go on. Bill was all pep and juices. Say, did I ever tell you about Kel's father? He was the funniest old man you ever saw in your life. He had a paresis, which eats away the forepart of your brain. So you get so's you're not responsible for anything that comes into your mind. He had a house in Texas, and he had carpenters working 24 hours a day, putting out new wings. He'd leap up in the middle of the night and he'd say, I don't want a goddamn wing. Put it over there. The carpenters had to take everything down, and they'd start all over again. Come dawn, you'd see the hammering away at this new wing. Then the old man would get bored with that and say, God damn it, I want to go to Maine. And he'd get into his car and he'd drive off 100 miles an hour. Great showers of chicken feathers followed his track for hundreds of miles. He'd stop his car in the middle of a Texan town just to get out and buy some whiskey. Traffic would honk all around him, and he'd come rushing out of the store yelling, Shut your goddamn noith, you bunch of bastards. He lisped. When you have paresis, you lisp. You lisp. One night he came into my house in St. Louis and tooted the horn and said, Come on out, let's go to Texas and see Kells. He was going back from Maine. He claimed he bought a house in Long Island overlooking a Jewish cemetery because he liked to see so many dead Jews. Oh, he was horrible. I could tell you stories about him all day. Say, ain't this a nice day? And it sure was. The softest breezes blew in from the levees. It was worth the whole trip. We rushed into the house after Bill to go and measure the wall for a shelf, and he showed us the dining table he built. It was made of wood 6 inches thick. This is a table that'll last 1,000 years, said Bill, leaning his long, thin face at us maniacally. He banged on. In the evenings, he sat at the table, picking at his food, throwing the bones to cats. He had 7 cats. I love cats. I especially like the ones that squeal when I hold them over the bathtub. He insisted on demonstrating, but someone was in the bathroom. Well, he said, we can't do that now. Say, I've been in a fight with the neighbors next door. He told us about the neighbors. They were a vast crew with sassy children who threw stones over the rickety fence at Julie and Willie and sometimes Bill. He told him to cut it out, and the old man rushed out and yelled something in Portuguese, and Bill went into the house and came back with his shotgun, and we scoured the yard for things to do. There was a tremendous fence Bill had been working on to separate him from the obnoxious neighbors, but it would never be finished. The task was too much. He rocked it back and forth to show us how solid it was. Suddenly he grew tired and quiet and went in the house and disappeared in the bathroom for his morning fix or mid-morning or pre-lunch. He came out glassy-eyed and calm and sat down under his burning lamp, and the sunlight poked feebly behind the drawn shade. "Say, why don't you fellows try my accumulator in the front room? Put some juice in your bones. I always rush up and take off 90 miles an hour for the nearest whorehouse." This was his laugh when he wasn't really laughing. "Say, Jack, after lunch, let's you and me go play the horses over to the bookie joint in Gratna." He was magnificent. He took a nap after lunch in his chair and the air gun on his lap, and little Willie curled around his neck sleeping. It was a pretty sight, father and son. A father that would certainly never bore his son when it came to finding things to do and talk about. He woke up with a start and he stared at me, and I took a minute, and he took a minute to recognize who I was. "What are you gonna go to the coast for, Jack?" he asked, and went back to sleep a moment. In the afternoon, we went to Gretna, just Bill and me, and we drove in his old Chevy. Neil's Hudson was slow and sleek. Bill's Chevy was high and rattly. It was like 1910. The bookie joint was located near the waterfront in the big chromium leather bar that opened up in the back to a tremendous hall where entries and numbers were posted on the wall. Louisiana characters were all around with racing forms. Bill and I had a beer, and casually Bill went over to the slot machine and threw a $50 piece in, and the counter clicked, "Jackpot, jackpot, jackpot," and the last jackpot hung for just a moment and slipped off to Cherry. He had lost $100 or more just by a Contera. "Damn!" yelled Bill. "I got these things adjusted. You could see it right then. I had the jackpot and the mechanism clicked back. Well, what are you gonna do?" We examined the racing form. I hadn't played the horses in years and was bemused with all the new names. There was one horse called Big Pop that sent me into temporary trance, just thinking of my father, who used to play the horses with me. I was just about to mention it to Bill when he said, "Well, I think I'll try this Ebony Corsair here." Then I finally said it. "Big Pop reminds me of my father." He mused for just a second, his clear blue eyes fixed on mine hypnotically so that I couldn't tell what he was thinking or where he was, and then he went over and bet on Ebony Corsair. And Big Pop won and paid 50 to 1. "Damn," said Bill. "I should have known better. I've had experience with this before." "Oh, when will we ever learn?" "What do you mean?" "Big Pop is what I mean. You had a vision, boy, a vision. Only damn fools pay no attention to visions." "How do you know your father, who was an old horse player, didn't just momentarily communicate to you that Big Pop was gonna win the race? The name brought the feeling up in you. That's what I was thinking when you mentioned it. My cousin in Missouri once bet on a horse that had a name that reminded him of his mother, and it won and paid a big price. Same thing happened this afternoon. Let's go. This is the last time I'll ever play the horses with you around. All these visions drive me to distraction."